The morning air in Washington, D.C., carried a sharpness usually reserved for storm fronts or steel blades. It was 6:13 a.m. when Jasmine Crockett's phone buzzed. No name, no pleasantries, just the kind of government language that sounds more like a threat than a request. You are hereby summoned to appear before the D.C. Federal Court of Appeals at 9 a.m. No explanation. No legal counsel contacted. No citation of precedent. Just a date, a time, and the unmistakable hum of urgency cloaked in cold legal ritual. She stared at the screen, pulse steady, spine straight. Not with calm, but with memory. She'd seen this play before. She'd studied the script. How institutions wrap retaliation in robes, how they dress fear in formality. But even Jasmine couldn't have predicted what would come next. Just 3 days earlier, she had stood tall during a Senate oversight hearing, delivering a searing critique of the judiciary. She hadn't named names, but she hadn't needed to. Her words had landed like precision strikes. Accountability isn't optional. It's overdue. The room had gone still. The judiciary had gone silent. But power never stays quiet for long. It sharpens its knives in private, then moves in public. This was that moment. By 8:47 a.m., the courthouse loomed above her like a concrete colossus, gray and angular against the colorless morning sky. Reporters already lined the marble steps like vultures on a power line, notebooks half open, eyes predatory. Inside, the air was colder. Not by temperature, but by design. The courtroom was packed, not with ordinary observers, but with federal staffers, legal scholars, political operatives, the kind of crowd that gathers not for justice, but for spectacle. Then the door creaked open, and everything changed. The air shifted, like thunder before the flash. In walked Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, not as a witness, not as an observer, but as the presiding authority. It was more than irregular. It was unconstitutional. He had no jurisdiction, no mandate, no reason to be there. And yet, he walked with the calm arrogance of a man who believed the law bent to his will. Not the other way around. He took his seat. Every camera shutter fired. Every journalist leaned forward. Jasmine didn't move. She knew this wasn't a hearing. It was a setup, a political crucifixion dressed in robes. The gavel hadn't even struck yet, but the execution had already begun. The gavel never fell. It didn't have to. The real sentence began with a glance. Brett Kavanaugh's eyes locking onto Jasmine with a mix of disdain and smug satisfaction. This wasn't justice. This was dominion on display. And it was about to get worse. Jasmine's lawyer stood to speak. A respected constitutional litigator, 20 years in federal courtrooms, his voice practiced prepared. He got as far as his name. Objection. We don't need rehearsed defenses here, Kavanaugh cut in, raising a hand like a monarch tired of theater. The words sliced through the room like a whip. It wasn't a legal objection. It was a public silencing. Gasps didn't come, but the shift was felt. Even legal scholars in the audience stiffened. Even the stenographer paused before her fingers resumed. Then came the pivot, calculated, deliberate, personal. Kavanaugh turned his full attention to Jasmine, his voice cool, his posture almost lazy. His next words weren't law. They were an attack. You, he said, with a smirk playing just beneath his voice. You are a dangerous cocktail. Political ambition. Low ethics. Confidence entirely unearned. Each word fell like a blow. Not to Jasmine's argument, but to her existence. This wasn't about the hearing anymore. It was about who she was. A black woman. Unafraid. And in the room they never wanted her to enter. She didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Didn't beg. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was armor. And it infuriated him. Kavanaugh leaned back, voice lowering into something colder, something more venomous. Individuals like you should not be anywhere near Congress or any institution that holds real power. The word "you" wasn't legal. It was a verdict handed down by patriarchy, a sentence signed by privilege. And then, like a man stamping a receipt, he reached into his folder. Not for evidence, but for punishment. With a dry, bored voice, he announced, "This court hereby issues a 5-year suspension from all governmental duties. Effective immediately." There was no debate, no deliberation, no precedent cited, just judgment. 20 minutes. That's all it took to erase a congressional career. And Kavanaugh had done it without jurisdiction, without shame, and with cameras rolling. Outside, headlines flashed like emergency sirens. Justice or power play? Crockett silenced, no defense allowed. But inside, Jasmine sat motionless. Her body was seated, but her presence? It had just cracked the foundation of the very bench that tried to bury her. She had taken every blow and refused to bow. But the storm was far from over, because the system that tried to silence her just made its first mistake. The courtroom echoed behind her, verdicts wrapped in vanity, dressed in ritual, amplified by cameras. But Jasmine wasn't broken. She was calculating. As she exited through the shadowed marble hallway, press swarmed like a wave. Microphones, flashes, whispered predictions of a political obituary. And then, from the far end of the corridor, just beneath the bronze statue of blindfolded justice, someone stepped out of the shadows. Senator Allen Rivers. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. With the practiced silence of a man used to dangerous truths, he brushed past Jasmine and, with barely emotion, pressed something into her palm. A thin, brown leather envelope. Heavy in weight. Heavier in consequence. He vanished into a private elevator before anyone could register what had just happened. Jasmine didn't stop. She didn't flinch. She walked through the chaos and into the armor of her waiting car. Only after the doors closed, muting the hysteria, did she open it. The contents hit like a second trial. Except this one had no judge, no gavel, and no room left for lies. Inside, DOJ stamped memos marked confidential, internal review only. Faded invoices, private flight logs, resort hospitality bills under false names, wire transfer records. And at the center of it all, Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Page by page, Jasmine peeled back the rot. Lavish gifts never disclosed, charter flights to international resorts, meetings with lobbyists just days before court rulings. But then, her breath caught. A single wire transfer $2.7 million routed through a Delaware-based nonprofit. Date: September 2016. Memo: Special Circumstance Resolution. Destination: a law firm known for confidential sexual misconduct settlements. No names, but no ambiguity. It was buried during the vetting for his Supreme Court nomination. Sealed with an NDA. Scrubbed from the public record. Hidden behind robes, rituals, and privilege. This wasn't a rumor. This was proof. Jasmine stared down at the documents, the leather envelope spread open like dynamite waiting for a fuse. She didn't weep. She didn't panic. She smiled. Not a smile of triumph, but of clarity. "This isn't about clearing my name anymore," she whispered to herself. "This is about exposing his." The very system that had tried to bury her had just handed her the blade. And when she stepped back into that courtroom, she was no longer the defendant. They just didn't know it yet. The marble floors of the courtroom felt colder the second time Jasmine walked across them. But it wasn't the air. It was the tension. This time, everybody knew something had shifted. The press was packed wall to wall. Phones glowed. Pens hovered mid-air. The livestream viewer count ticked past 4.3 million and climbing. Brett Kavanaugh sat like a statue, still cloaked in his robe. But it hung differently now. Not like armor. Like denial. His fingers fidgeted. His jaw was set too tightly. The predator from before had become a man preparing for exposure. And then Jasmine stood. No theatrics. No trembling hands. No papers rustling for effect. Just stillness. Composed. Controlled. Undeniably in command. "Your Honor," she said, voice even, calm, surgical. "I request a final statement for the record, to defend my name and my integrity." Kavanaugh paused. Just days ago, he wouldn't have hesitated to deny her. But now? "Make it brief," he muttered. Too late. Jasmine opened her briefcase, pulled out the brown leather envelope, unfolded a sheet of paper, held it high enough for every journalist to see the Department of Justice letterhead. "This," she began, "is a confidential DOJ memo detailing a pattern of undeclared gifts, financial ties, and back-channel settlements involving Justice Brett Kavanaugh." Silence broke, not into outrage, but into complete stillness, the kind that follows something irreversible. She listed charter flights paid by lobbying firms, luxury resort stays billed under aliases, financial consulting fees to shell companies with ties to pending cases. Then she turned the page. "A $2.7 million wire transfer," she said, "routed through a nonprofit to settle a sexual misconduct claim in 2016, scrubbed from his confirmation records." Kavanaugh didn't interrupt. He couldn't. Her tone was devoid of drama, because the facts didn't need any help. They landed heavier than any monologue ever could. And then she looked him directly in the eye. "If I'm being suspended for words spoken into a microphone, tell me, Your Honor, do you believe accepting yachts and cash from litigants is somehow more ethical?" The silence broke, not with sound, but with realization. She had turned the entire room inside out. She wasn't on trial. The system was. Jasmine walked them through every lie hidden beneath the robe. Then, without warning, she nodded to the court clerk. A monitor flickered to life. Up flashed an image, Brett Kavanaugh, lounging in a leather chair at a Colorado hunting resort, whiskey in hand. Beside him, Martin Chase, CEO of a company whose lawsuit had recently been denied by the Supreme Court without comment. Kavanaugh had voted not to hear the case. Coincidence? No. Pattern. But she wasn't finished. Next came the voice. A young woman, barely audible, played through the speakers. "He told me if I went public, they'd destroy me. That I didn't understand the forces I was playing with." A former legal intern. Silenced. Discredited. Vanished from D.C. Jasmine let the audio finish. Then, in that same unshakable tone, said, "That voice belongs to a former vetting committee intern. Her complaint was never reviewed. Her career erased. No rebuttal. No legal objection. No ruling." Kavanaugh didn't even look up. For the first time in his career, he wasn't holding the gavel. Jasmine was. And she was about to drop it, with the weight of truth weaponized into evidence. The moment the young woman's voice faded from the speakers, the room didn't exhale. It tightened. The silence wasn't polite. It wasn't stunned. It was something else. It was final. Jasmine stood still. The brown leather envelope closed on the podium like a gavel of its own. And then, from the far left bench, without a word, a senior Department of Justice official rose. He didn't speak. He didn't glance toward Kavanaugh. He simply closed his folder and walked out. That movement, quiet, unannounced, utterly deliberate, was louder than any ruling ever made in that courtroom. His exit didn't just carry symbolism. It carried consequence. This was no longer a performance. This was federal action. Brett Kavanaugh didn't blink, didn't shift, but his fingers gripped the arms of his chair so tightly they turned white. He was still trying to hold on to the illusion. The robe, the bench, the silence, But all of it had started to rot under the weight of truth laid bare. The robe looked oversized now, like a costume worn by a man who'd stayed in character too long. The bench no longer protected him. It boxed him in. And Jasmine? She hadn't said a word since presenting the last page. But her stillness had grown larger than the bench itself. She wasn't rising. The room was sinking. Into accountability. Into clarity. Into change. Then came the rustle. A buzz in an aide's earpiece. A whispered confirmation. Outside the courtroom. Cameras caught it first. At a press podium just steps from the courthouse, a DOJ spokesperson faced the nation and declared, "Effective immediately, Justice Brett Kavanaugh's supervisory judicial authority is suspended." Back inside, the reaction wasn't loud. It was structural. Something had broken. The gallery shifted. Staffers stopped pretending to be neutral. The court officer stepped forward with a second announcement. The 5-year suspension imposed upon Representative Jasmine Crockett is hereby vacated, retroactively nullified. But the next line hit like a hammer to tradition. This ruling was found to be in violation of procedural safeguards and constitutional fairness. And finally, the sentence no one had ever heard a court utter aloud. The court apologizes for the irregular process by which the original sanction was administered. Jasmine didn't smile, didn't look to the press. She stood like someone who had carried the truth so far up the mountain. She had no interest in a summit photo. And Kavanaugh? He didn't rise. He couldn't. The man who once dismissed her with words like unearned and dangerous was now dwarfed by his own silence. Staff avoided his gaze. The stenographer didn't look up. Even the security guard at the exit leaned away. Not out of disrespect, but detachment. Kavanaugh finally moved, pushed back his chair. The scrape of it across marble was the only sound. He didn't meet Jasmine's eyes. He didn't ask for understanding. He just walked, not as a judge, not as a symbol, just as a man stepping out of a lie. He reached the door. A bailiff hesitated, unsure whether to open it for him. So Kavanaugh opened it himself and walked into history's footnote. No standing ovation, no cheers, because this wasn't victory. It was a reckoning. A robe had fallen, but more importantly, a truth had risen. And Jasmine, she remained, not as a survivor, but as the beginning of something entirely new. The courtroom was quiet, not with defeat, but with attention. The robe had fallen, the bench had cracked, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to celebrate. She was here to build something that would outlast her name. She stepped forward again, not with fire, not with fury, but with focus. In her hands, 3 plain sheets of paper. No footnotes, no legal jargon, just bold, clear print. Like truth stripped of costume. She placed them on the podium, one by one. Each page a matchstick, not for burning down, but for lighting the way forward. Small Orange Diamond Reform 1. An independent judicial ethics commission. A body, she said calmly, wholly separate from the executive, legislative, or judicial branches, with full power to investigate and enforce ethics violations. No reaction from the bench. No protest from the gallery. They knew. For too long, the judiciary had policed itself, with robes circling robes in protection. This commission wouldn't answer to a president or a party. It would answer to the public. One staffer scribbled. Another took a photo. The room wasn't resisting. It was recording history. Small Orange Diamond Reform 2. Mandatory disclosure of all gifts and financial ties. Every gift, every favor, every financial relationship over $100, Jasmine said, disclosed quarterly. Audited publicly. No exceptions. Some in the room shifted, uncomfortable. But Jasmine didn't blink. Justice, she added, cannot be bought in cigars, scotch, or invitations to the lodge. Not a sound, because the truth wasn't just pointed, it was proven. And they'd all seen what hiding behind hospitality looked like. Small Orange Diamond Reform 3. Absolute whistleblower protection for court staff. She held up the last page. Let it hang in the air before she spoke. No woman, Jasmine said, her voice softer now, should ever be threatened into silence by the office that claims to uphold the law. The room stirred. Not in protest. In recognition. They'd heard the intern's voice. They'd heard the warning in her whisper. They'll destroy me. And now, Jasmine was turning that whisper into legislation. She didn't ask for applause. She didn't explain further. She just stood back and let the 3 sheets of paper fill the room. Not as a performance, not as a plea, as a blueprint. Something that couldn't be silenced. Something that belonged to everyone now. From the gallery, young interns leaned forward. One whispered, "It's already started." Another replied, "No, she just started it." And Jasmine? She gave a subtle nod. Not to the bench, not to the press, but to the next generation watching from the back row. Because the courtroom didn't belong to robes anymore. It belonged to what came next. The hearing ended. The gavel never struck. The bench never ruled. But by the time Jasmine Crockett walked out of the courtroom, something tectonic had shifted. Not just in law, but in the soul of the nation. The public wasn't waiting for permission to respond. Small Orange Diamond, the clip that cracked the silence. The video of Jasmine's testimony hit the internet like a truth-shaped grenade. No edits. No music. Just the raw footage of a woman standing still, speaking plainly, and leveling the institution that tried to bury her. Do you believe accepting yachts and cash from litigants is somehow more ethical? That single question tore through the digital bloodstream. Within 24 hours, 70 million views. Hashtag Jasmine Speaks Truth. Hashtag Justice No Privilege. Hashtag Kavanaugh Files. Not a hashtag storm. A cultural convulsion. Small Orange Diamond, a movement reignited. Law students reposted the clip with captions like, "This is why I applied to law school." Veterans wrote, "I fought for this country so someone like her could finally say this aloud." Professors halted lectures mid-sentence to show the footage. Civil rights leaders called it the most important courtroom moment since Anita Hill. Even ideological divides briefly buckled under the weight of the moment. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about trust, about who the law serves, and who it protects. Small Orange Diamond Congress responds. At 10:42 a.m. the next morning, the Speaker of the House took to the floor and announced, "A special oversight committee will begin immediate investigation into judicial vetting and confirmation processes from the last 20 years. The resolution passed with bipartisan support. A rarity. An earthquake. Senior staff whispered in closed-door meetings. If this is the surface, what's underneath? Old complaints once sealed were being unsealed. The phone lines at judicial ethics offices lit up with anonymous tips. The quiet culture of protectionism had been cracked, and air was rushing in. Small Orange Diamond, the one who said nothing. And Jasmine? She didn't speak, didn't take a victory lap, didn't appear on talk shows. Her team issued one sentence. Jasmine Crockett's work speaks for itself. Now so must the system. While networks scrambled for an interview, she went home, back to Texas, to the streets that once doubted her, that now lined up with signs reading, "Let her speak." No more silent benches. In one photo, a father knelt beside his daughter, pointing toward Jasmine as she passed. "That's what courage looks like," he told her. She nodded. No speech. Just forward. Because Jasmine didn't create a moment. She made it impossible to ignore what the moment revealed. The world was still shouting. Cable news cleared primetime slots. Editorials ran red with analysis. panelists debated whether Jasmine Crockett had just ended an era or begun one. But Jasmine? She disappeared. Not into hiding. Into purpose. Small orange diamond a pen, not a podium. 6 days passed with no word. Then, at 6 a.m. sharp, Jasmine's voice returned. Not on television. Not through a microphone. It arrived in the form of a 784-word essay, published in The Atlantic, under a headline with no punctuation. Justice does not come from a black robe. No name-calling. No self-congratulation. Just razor-edged reflection. She didn't recap the hearing. She didn't mention Kavanaugh. Instead, she took aim at the architecture of comfort. Judges are not gods. Robes are not armor. And reverence, when left unexamined, becomes a hiding place for rot. She reminded America that silence isn't professionalism. It's complicity dressed as decorum. That justice isn't born in tradition, but in people willing to pull back the curtain. She concluded, a democracy doesn't crumble when it questions power. It crumbles when it forgets how. Small orange diamond a bill, not a banner. Exactly 1 week after the hearing, Jasmine Crockett walked back into the Capitol. No press pool, no campaign rally. Just her team, and a stack of papers. At precisely 10 a.m., she submitted the Judicial Transparency and Accountability Act of 2025. It wasn't a placeholder. It was a blueprint. Inside, mandatory financial disclosures for federal judges, quarterly independent ethics audits, lifetime bans on ruling in cases involving known benefactors, full whistleblower protections for all judicial staff. She didn't host a press conference. She just handed it over, like truth turned policy. Small orange diamond the reaction. Quiet, then earthquake. What happened next wasn't staged. It erupted. Congressional offices, Democrat and Republican alike, began calling the clerk's office, not to block the bill, to co-sponsor it. By sundown, 40 names. By midnight, 92. Some had never agreed on taxes, abortion, climate, or health care. But this was different. This wasn't born from pressure. One senator told PBS. It was born from clarity. The press tried to reach Jasmine for comment. She said nothing. She didn't need to, because for once, the law wasn't a mystery hidden behind ritual. It was a mirror, and the country was finally starting to see itself in it. No fanfare, no security detail, no camera crew, just Jasmine, back in Texas, back on the highway she knew like muscle memory. The same stretch she'd driven 1,000 times, except this time, she wasn't going home. She was returning to the place that made her fight. The high school stood like a frozen photograph. Cracked pavement at the front entrance, faded banners above the lockers, a dented trophy case with dust-covered plaques, the same broken sign on the security office she passed every morning at 17. But now, the auditorium lights were on. Inside, 300 students waited in metal folding chairs, some in hoodies, some in uniform, many wide-eyed and unsure what to expect. They weren't here to meet a politician. They were here to see the girl who once sat in the second-to-last row. The one who got suspended for asking why her neighborhood had fewer polling stations. When Jasmine entered, no one clapped. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. The kind of stillness that says, we know what you've survived, even if we don't have the words yet. The principal gave her a nod. Jasmine took the mic. No speech. No podium flourish. Just presence. She told them the truth about the courtroom. Not the wood and lights, but the weight. What it felt like to sit there not as one voice, but carrying all the ones who never had a microphone. Then, from the back, a boy in a plain red hoodie raised his hand. "Weren't you scared?" he asked. "I mean, when he was sitting right in front of you. That Supreme Court justice?" There was a pause. Even the teachers leaned in. Jasmine smiled. Not the practiced one. The quiet one. The kind you make when you're about to give away something sacred. I wasn't standing in front of him, she said. I was standing behind everyone who'd ever been silenced and never had a microphone to answer back. The room inhaled. One teacher at the side of the stage wiped her eyes. A student in the second row whispered, "Damn," under their breath. Not as a joke, but like it was a blessing, because that sentence didn't stay in the air. It etched itself into the walls. No one asked another question. No one had to, because that line didn't belong to Jasmine anymore. It belonged to everyone who heard it, and finally saw themselves in the shape of someone who had refused to disappear. 2 days later, someone posted a photo from Columbia Law School, carved in bronze above the reading room entrance. I wasn't standing in front of him. I was standing behind everyone who'd ever been silenced and never had a microphone to answer back. Jasmine Crockett, Congressional Hearing Transcript, 2025. No caption, no commentary, just the quote, shining in metal where once she was told she didn't belong. Jasmine never called herself brave. She never held a press conference. She never tried to brand the moment. She passed it on. What she did inside that courtroom didn't just shake the system. It rewrote what it meant to confront it. Small orange diamond, not a brand, a baton. Across the country, Jasmine's words moved like gospel. I wasn't standing in front of him. I was standing behind everyone who'd ever been silenced. They appeared on courthouse steps, in campus hallways, inside the notebooks of young law students too afraid to speak. Until now, she didn't ask to be quoted. She just made it unavoidable. Civil rights groups began using her hearing as required training. Whistleblower protections gained new funding. And for the first time in years, law school syllabi were updated. Not with theory, but with someone who turned the law into a mirror. Small orange diamond, a law, not a moment. The Judicial Transparency and Accountability Act became more than legislation. It became a national standard. It passed through committees. Amendments were added. Budget allocations approved. And soon, the very judges who once ruled without oversight were subject to the law Jasmine built. Financial disclosures, independent audits, whistleblower protection for the next intern too afraid to speak. It wasn't radical. It was long overdue. And the country didn't cheer. It read the fine print. For the first time in a long time, people cared about what was on page 47 of a bill. Small orange diamond, the final voice. After weeks of silence, Jasmine finally spoke again. Not with applause waiting, but with a question. Not on a podium, but in writing, in the final paragraph of an op-ed that became her last public statement on the matter. Justice will never belong to the powerful, until it first belongs to the powerless. And it begins the moment someone decides to speak. Not louder, but truer. She didn't include her name at the top, because this story was never about her. Small orange diamond, a mirror, not a monument. Every time Jasmine walked into a new room, people looked at her, not like a headline, but like a mirror. She had become a question. What if truth isn't the threat, but the cure? In courtrooms, in classrooms, in quiet hallways where complicity once hid, Jasmine's legacy pressed on like a pressure point. She didn't rewrite justice. She made people demand more of it. Small orange diamond, a reckoning, and a relay. Her story wasn't meant to inspire applause. It was meant to ask, now that you know, what will you do? Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just carry the fire. She handed it to you. You, the student. You, the voter. You, the public defender, the intern, the clerk, the citizen. She reminded us that injustice isn't just a villain. It's a machine powered by silence. And your voice? It's voltage. So now that her voice has faded into history, What will you do with what she left behind? Not in protest, not in performance, but in purpose.